Most DSCR deals don't get stuck, they get denied, and here's why. Hey there, welcome to Mortgage Tips and Bacon Bits. I'm Sean Segaloff. If you find this information helpful, click like and click subscribe. I really do appreciate it. DSCRs can be paperwork heavy. The reason for that is there's a lot of documentation required, not necessarily your personal income because we don't use that, but as far as the property itself. We need to be able to document the property, the income producing the property, the taxes, the insurance, your reserves. Those are all things that can seem paperwork heavy if you're not prepared. So the key is to make sure you have a punch list before you move forward, whether it's on a purchase or on a refinance of a DSCR property. So the other thing that can come up that can delay your closing is a appraisal issue. You got to remember, when we're talking about appraisals when it comes to a DSCR, we're not just talking about the value of the property, which is important. We're talking about the rental value. So there's a couple ways that can be documented, either through a rental appraisal or through actual documentation of rent. So when you're talking actual documentation of rent, is it a long-term rent where you have a lease, or is it a short-term rental where it's Airbnb or VRBO? Those are the things that you have to be able to document. And the key is you want to make sure that you have those leases correct, especially on the long-term leases. You know, a lot of times we'll hear, oh, I have my tenant for 10 years. We have a lease, but we haven't signed a new one. He's fine. She's fine. Well, that's great for you, but not necessarily for the lender. The lender's going to have concerns. The lender's going to want to make sure there's signatures on the lease. They want to make sure it's a current lease. They're going to want to see how much time is left on the lease. These are all important things that might seem trivial when you're dealing with someone that you know that's been there a long time, but it is really important. The other issue is delays in appraisal and appraisal questions. So again, we're talking about not just the value of the property itself, but the rental value. You want to make sure you're using real estimates when you're figuring out your calculations beforehand, because if you're using your best guess, that's not going to work for an appraiser or for an underwriter. They're going to want to see actual documentation that supports this. So again, having those documented leases or those records for short-term rentals are going to be very important. Insurance surprises. So that's something else we want to make sure that we're checking on. The reason is insurance is one of the biggest things that underwriters look at, not just for coverage, which is important, having the proper coverage, but it's how they detect fraud. So they're going to be looking at if they see that, maybe you have contents coverage and it's a primary policy, not an investment policy, not a rental policy. Those are things that are going to set off red flags. So you want to make sure, a lot of people keep their primary residence and turn it into an investment property and buy their new primary residence. You want to make sure that you've updated that insurance. And you also want to make sure you've gotten insurance quotes. You want to have an idea what your insurance is going to cost if you haven't already on a purchase, because that's going to be factored into your ratios, and that's going to be an important part. So this is Mortgage Tips and Bacon Bits. So, of course, I got to drop some bacon bits in here. So here's your bacon bit right now. Bacon jerky. Hear me out. Walgreens actually has a decent bacon jerky. It's under their own private label. I think it's the Nice label, I think it is. I'm not positive top of my head. I don't remember. But they sell two different ones, a regular and then like a hickory smoked or a maple. And am I telling you, wow, it's the best bacon jerky you're ever going to have? No. What I am going to tell you is the quality is decent and the price is decent, especially because they used to buy one, get one, but now they do a lot of buy one, get one half off. So that's your bacon bit for this video. Back to mortgages. Another thing that can delay is proof of reserves. So you got to remember, this is investment property. They want to make sure you have proper reserves because there could be times when the property is empty and there's no income coming in, or there could be upkeep and maintenance needed because, again, you're dealing with tenants, you're dealing with short-term renters, you're dealing with people that may not treat the property the way you would if it was a primary residence. So you want to make sure you can document your reserves, and that's going to be bank accounts. If you have a lot of money transferring around or big deposits, those are things we're going to have to source and have explanations for. So, the calmer and more normal the bank account is, we see the short-term rentals coming in or the rent checks coming in, that makes sense. But when there's a large deposit that comes in or something like that, that's stuff that we have to question, and we got to make sure that you actually qualify for this and that you didn't go and borrow money for reserves, which is something you can't do. Title investing. So you can do a DSCR or investment property in an LLC. That's not an issue. The issue is when you're switching the title around, some lenders are going to have seasoning requirements. So what you need to keep in mind with those seasoning requirements are, it may be a situation where, you're moving out, you're flipping into an LLC. How long ago was it done? Because what they want to make sure is that you're not putting it into an LLC just for the purpose of doing the loan and then you're putting it back in something else. Now, we see this a lot more with primary residences where they'll take it out of the LLC, put in their personal name to refinance, and pop it back in the LLC. But these are things that you need to look for. So when dealing with the investment property, we want to make sure that we have the proper seasoning, or we're dealing with a lender that doesn't have a seasoning requirement. And you want to make sure we've documented everything. You want to make sure that the deed is set up exactly how you want it for your risk tolerance, for your insurance policies, because that's important also. If you was your primary residence and you moved out, you're now going to rent it out because you bought a new primary, and you put it in an LLC, but you haven't called the insurance company to update them with the LLC, that's going to delay your closing. So there's a thing we call a prevention checklist. I prefer to call it a punch list. You want to make sure that when you're talking to your lender, you're going to say, hey, what is my punch list? What are the items you're going to need from me? And you want to get those and have those prepared. Honestly, if you're buying, have those prepared before you go shopping for the property. Because again, we want to review those. We want to make sure we have the correct information, make sure everything's good, make sure you're good to go. Because the last thing you want to do is get under a contract for a property and find out that you don't qualify, or there's a big issue and then we get a delay closing and start switching lenders. So that's always important to have that punch list and have that checklist for that information. And keep in mind on that punch list, you're talking about lease documents if it's a refinance. You're talking about your bank statements. You're talking insurance information. That's all stuff that's going to be on that punch list. So if you want to chat about this or any other mortgage product, I have put my scheduling link down in the bottom. I'd appreciate you clicking on that. But also, more importantly, what I'd really appreciate is you share this with somebody who find the information useful, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions, let me know, because don't forget, mortgages, they don't need to be complicated. They just need to be explained clearly.